Well, anybody watch football today? Anybody? Any football watchers? Did Cincinnati? Don't say anything. How about you're recording that one? All right, I won't say. I don't know who won. I've been up here on a personnel meeting since about 4, so I'm not quite sure, but I'm excited. And then Dallas is winning, right? Or Dallas is playing, I hear, at 5:30. I don't know who they're winning. I have no idea. Well, I open with that because I believe chapter 15 reminds me, I've never been in a locker room during a Super Bowl pregame. But I can imagine what is happening in Revelation 15 is much like a heavenly Super Bowl pregame party or preparation for the coming of Christ. It is like, here we are. Here's the moment. I remember playing high school football. I graduated 142 pounds. Brian was talking about his weight when he graduated. I was 142 pounds. I was a wide receiver. And I remember some of the early games that we would play. The scrimmages, the pregame, you don't even have the right uniform. You might not even have the right number you're going to wear. Everybody's kind of jawing, messing around. And no, really not a big deal. And the coach would be like, hey, focus, this matters, Like, yeah, it doesn't really matter for our score. Then you get into the season and a couple of preseason games, kind of non-conference games. It gets a little more intense, kind of focused. And you get to the regular season conference games, and it starts to kind of tighten up. Everybody in the locker room getting tighten up. And then by the time you get to playoffs, man, you don't hear a pin drop. Or you do, you could hear a pin drop. It's so thick with intensity. I remember my very last game, and you never know. You don't know if it's going to be your last game. But you're going to play like it's your last game. And that's exactly kind of the feeling I got when I was reading through and studying Revelation 15. And I remember our very last game was, unfortunately, against Tulsa Union. And we're in the locker room. I'm a senior in high school, and I remember we never would beat Union. This is now, luckily, they're out of the 6A conference that Stillwater is in, and they're in their own little kind of world of 6,000 students in a school versus my graduating class was 390. But we still had to play them. And I remember being in that locker room, and it was so intense because you didn't know if this was going to be my very last game. And I remember being in that locker room, and there was this anticipation, such intensity. And I just have to think, and the sense I have reading, that the throne room of God was at this moment. Like, here we go. The return of Christ is amongst us. In this chapter 15, and is it you next week, or is it Pastor Woogamuth? Yes, so John Woogamuth will be with us next week teaching chapter 16. He's from Henderson Hills, Pastor Henderson. But this chapter 15 is this interlude. And really, it's an interlude of worship and an interlude of declaration and awareness of what is happening. But we see that this introduction is the voice of the victors, is kind of the title of this section. And it's this moment of action that's just about to take place. And John sees, and I'll kind of introduce the first 4 verses to you before reading them, but John sees the 7 angels holding the 7 vials, or bowls, depending on your translation, of the wrath of God. 7 has a significance. We've been hearing a lot about that. The 7 is a number of completion. We'll land on that and expound a little more on that here in a few verses. And these angels are, what John is seeing is poised for action. They're in this moment, and they have the bowls of wrath, the perfect judgment of God, in their hands. And they're about to be released on the play of God at His timing and His calling. But they know it's coming, and they're poised for that. And so what we see is this moment. And so now we'll reveal what John sees, starting in verse 1 of chapter 15. Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and amazing. Sometimes we say great and amazing. We say that a lot. Great. Oh, that's great. That's amazing. He sees something quite undescribable, quite stupendous. He sees 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last. For with them the wrath of God is finished. Verse 2, and I saw what appeared to be a sea of glass mingled with fire, and also those who had conquered the beast and its image and the number of its name, standing beside the sea of glass with harps of God in their hands. And they sang, those who had these harps in their hand, who had conquered the beast. They sang the song of Moses. Not a song, but the song of Moses. The servant of God and the song of the Lamb sang this great and mighty song. Great and amazing are your deeds, O Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the nations. Who will not fear, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. Wow. We'll break that into 2 groups. We'll read the rest in a moment. But man, let's look at these verses of what is happening. And if you can grasp the scene here, is you have John seeing these 7 angels on the cusp in, if you will, what I can relate to in the pregame locker room before the Super Bowl, before this moment of the return of Christ. And these 7 plagues are the 7 bowls of wrath, without unpacking that too much and getting into chapter 16. These wraths are the finish. This is it. It's about to be won. And then he sees what is the sea of glass. And the wrath of God has come to be finished in verse 1. In verse 2, what does he see? He sees this glass mingled with fire. Now 2 times John sees this scene. In Revelations 4:6, you see the first rendition, the first visual of this crystal sea. And it's important to point out that crystal, perfect kind of glass of the sea that he sees, which is a reminder of God's incredible holy purity. And most of the oceans and seas in that day would not have that crystal appearance. They were murky and muddy and dirty, and it would look impure. And the crystal sea in heaven, though, is God, a reflection of God's pure holiness. But it says it's mingled with fire. And what is John seeing here? Well, he's seeing this union of God's holiness and purity mingled with its justified wrath, this justified perfect judgment. And so you see on the edge of the bank of this mingling with fire, this perfect judgment that's now about to be poured out. Before in Revelation chapter 4, verse 6, there was no fire that was mingling. It was just this reminder of God's purity, His holiness, and His worthiness. But here, we see this fire that's mingling with this crystal. And it's an indication that God's judgment is perfect, and it's just, and it's coming. Here in verse 2, we see these, it says, those who had conquered the beast. These are the tribulation believers who overcame the beast and his systems. It says in Revelations 12:11, remember, it says, these people love not their own lives unto death. So these are believers who came to faith during the tribulation time, and they're on the edge of this sea, playing instruments and singing this incredible song, the Song of Moses. These tribulation believers refuse to bow down to the beast and bend their knee And John describes them as what? Victors. Because they had conquered, it said. Once again, you see the consistency through the entire book of Revelation about this conquering and overcoming. And these tribulation believers are described as they're the victors. They died for the name of Christ, and they're described as victors. They did not partake in the satanic system and taking the mark of the beast in Revelations 13:17. And because of that, they're unable to buy and sell. They're in essence, they were completely and totally dependent on God for everything. And because of that, they lost their lives. Some in Revelations 13:10 are described as being slain or put into prison. But the bottom line is every one of them practiced their faith and being faithfully enduring until the very end. They were patient until the very end and enduring just this incredible time. And they were at the edge playing instruments of worship of this song of Moses. And so this scene you see unfolding before John is just an incredible scene. It's an incredible scene in verse 1 and 2. In verse 3 it says this. It says, this song, sorry, let me back up here. In verse 3, we see this song, it says, and they sang the song of Moses. Well, this song of Moses was a shadow, a back shadow, if you will, on the Israelites as they left and their captivity and their exodus. The nation was delivered from Egypt by the blood of the Lamb. And the Egyptians' army had been destroyed at the Red Sea. And it was a very similar scene here. In thanksgiving to God, these Israelites stood by the sea and sang this exact song in the book of Exodus, the song of Moses. And we hear these tribulation saints heralding this same song at the sea of glass as it's mingled with fire. And they're playing instruments or harps, and they were singing this song. The same song mentioned in Revelations 4:6. Also in Psalm 119, verse 14, when Israel returned from their Babylonian captivity, and they were able to reestablish their government and their restored temple worship, the song they sang was this song, the song of Moses. And in the future, Isaiah prophesies about this moment that John is seeing in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 15 through chapter 12, verse 6. In the future, they sing this song as it's prophesied in Isaiah. And so what does John see? He sees this scene taking place that had been a typology or a type in Exodus. And you see prophesied in Isaiah, the same song that was sung when the Israelites returned from captivity. And they sang this song. Who will not fear, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. All the nations will come and worship you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. This is a good news song, a good news declaration. And for us, what's an application today for us is we have experienced our spiritual exodus. We've been liberated and set free by the blood of the Lamb and the word of your testimony, that you've put your faith and trust in Christ. The question from Luke 9:31 is, can you sing the song of Moses? Is that something that you can declare? Have you experienced the liberation of Jesus? I'm assuming in those who are here and our core group that you have, that you put your faith and trust in Jesus, and you can sing that declaration. My question for us is, can we stand and make that declaration in our life? that he is holy, for your name is holy, and your righteous acts have been revealed through my life. And so that's a great question to ask, a great modern day application personally to what we see the Israelites practice as they've been liberated from captivity, as they were returning to captivity again from the Babylonian captivity, and they were restored to the ability to worship, and we have been restored and given the ability to worship. We've been liberated for the purpose of worship. These tribulation believers who put their faith and trust in Jesus and pay the price for it now stand in worship at the sea before God. And my prayer is that we too kind of understand the depth of that, the potent power of our spiritual liberation. And our life reflects the same type of enduring faithfulness to the very end. And our life is a testimony to his holiness, to his greatness, to his righteous acts. And the righteous acts he gave was the sacrifice he made on the cross. But he sees this, John sees this scene. In Revelation 15:4 is an anticipation of the kingdom to come. The foretelling of what's going to happen one day where every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. From the Exodus to Revelation, Jesus is Lord. From the Gospels to the early church, Jesus is Lord. Today in our church, Jesus is Lord. And so we read in Psalm 145:17, affirming that the Lord is righteous in all his ways and holy is all his works. So the truth is, it would save many people a lot of pain and toil and torment if they would put their faith and trust in the sovereign knowledge of Jesus. And our goal is to let people know, put your faith and trust in Jesus. And avoid some of, doesn't mean we're removed from the depravity of our world, but how much better is Jesus than all the things that the earth dwellers, as it's described, have to endure when they had a chance. And before the return of Christ, we get into the very last, and man, I'm going quick. Let's see what we got. Wow. It is a short chapter, but we're going verse by verse still. But the fulfillment of this is the moment John sees the bowls in his hand. And again, this is that pregame locker room moment. But something significant is about to happen in the throne room of God. Something that hasn't happened since from the time the veil had been torn and the access to the throne of thrones, the ability to intercede and pray for the nations has been introduced, even in the time of the offering system in the Old Testament temple practice, and where the intercession for the nations could take place, or the people of Israel could take place by the chief priest. And we look here, and we'll land there, but it says verse 5, after this I looked, and the sanctuary of the tent of witnesses in heaven was opened, and out of the sanctuary came the 7 angels with the 7 plagues, and they were clothed in pure and bright linen, with golden sashes around their chests. And one of the 4 living creatures gave to the 7 angels 7 bowls, golden bowls, full of the wrath of God who lives forever and ever. And the sanctuary was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power. And no one could enter the sanctuary until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were finished. First, let's look at kind of verse 6 here, and let's kind of highlight the holy garments that these angels were wearing. The angels were clothed in in this attire, pure bright linen, gold sashes around their chests. And this is a significant parallel with the temple priest's garment of the Old Testament, because the service and the responsibility were divine and holy. And the service and the responsibility of these 7 angels, according to Scripture, their responsibility was divine and holy. This wrath, this pure judgment of God, was an act that was divine and holy. Next, each angel had a specific target. Without getting into 16 too much, saving that for next week, each of these bowls had a particular target of wrath. And the earth dwellers had already, using that language of Revelation, had already suffered the seals and the trumpet judgments. But the final series of judgment will be climaxed with God's plan. And then Jesus comes. Jesus returns. And so at this moment, when this is happening, we will know that the end is upon us. This holy wrath, these bowls, if we kind of get into their specificity in verse 7 with that again, because Revelations 15:5 really bleeds into 16. So I'm trying to compartmentalize it and not get into 16, even though it was written as one narrative. We're breaking it up like right at the moment of, oh, you're going to go all the way there and stop? Well, yeah, it's just to honor the teaching of 16 next week. Okay, then I'm going to get in. No. I'll say this. Verse 1 indicates that the angels had 7 bowls carrying 7 last plagues from God, this wrath of God. And you recall in Revelation 10:7, Christ announced that the pouring out of these vials are the mystery of God, will be the completion, and there will be no more delay. The moment these vials are poured out, Jesus returns. Immediately, it says no more delay. In the 7 last judgments is an indication, like I mentioned before, as the completion of the wrath of God. It's the finishing of the pouring out of the wrath onto mankind. And prior to this, Satan and his forces had a time of pouring out of terrible judgment upon believers, especially the Jews, if you read Revelation 12:12. And many of these Jews, remember, fled to Edom and Moab. And this is where some of them sought refuge and protection. But others died, as I mentioned, for their faith, along with many Gentiles. But here's something really important to note about what takes place here at this juncture in verse 8, is that John states that nobody in heaven was allowed into the temple until the bowls of wrath had been poured out. This is the only time that this takes place. And here's the significance of that. It's also a heartbreaking significance. There's going to be no more intercession for the world. It's over. No more interceding for the nations. No more prayers lifted up for the lost. It is over. It is done. God closes the door to the temple, allows these angels to pour out this wrath of judgment. It is so holy and so pure and so intense and so violent because God takes sin seriously. We sometimes justify sin, rationalize sin, manipulate situations for us to say it's okay. But when you look at the picture of how God sees sin, we see 2 things. Himself shedding his blood in the Son of God for the remission of our sin, those who put their faith and trust in Jesus, or this pouring out of immense judgment, so intense. He said, no more saints. No one is going to be in the throne room as these angels pour out. No more intercession, because we are beyond. Now we're past intercession. And there will be no more intercession from then on out, because there will also be no need. No need for intercession, because the kingdom has come. His will has been done. These 7 angels come out of the temple, pour out this divine vials of wrath, and God's judgment are complete on the earth. It's finished. It's over. And it sounds quite ominous, and it is. But there's good news. We have hope today. We have the answer for those who put their faith and trust in Jesus, and you have the answer for all those who we still today intercede for and pray for. The angels come out of the Holy of Holies, where the ark and the table of the laws are kept, the tablets of laws are kept. The wicked world had defiled and disobeyed God's law in the face of all that they still had to face during the tribulation. But now judgment has come, and here's the good news. All evil is vanquished. All sin forever and ever and ever is finished. And here's the good news, is that the gospel of Jesus has brought the one true King who's been born to die. And he's made a way. Jesus took our transgressions onto himself. This same wrath, ponder this significance of the wrath that was poured out onto Jesus for our forgiveness of sins, that he became our propitiation, our substitute payment. The significance of what that took in light of this throne room experience is intense. And it does for me is deep gratitude and humble awe. Like, oh, I don't deserve that. Yep. You're right. You don't. Nor do I. But out of the grace of God, the undeserved grace, he's been extending this loving kindness. And he continues to hold back this judgment until he sees fit, which is beyond our understanding. Why? And that the justice of God, and here's the thing, the justice of God that you see poured out onto mankind in this, what John sees, it's the justice of God that saves you. That same judgment, that same justice of God is what saves you, because he took the payment. So you didn't have to. The payment's been poured out. Has it been poured out on to the shoulders of Christ, or will it be poured out on to your shoulders? I'm thankful that I hope, Lord willing, every one of you has allowed Jesus to become your substitute. And if you haven't put your faith and trust in Jesus, I'm not just assuming that because you've been coming to this class or you've part of the membership of our church. Maybe you haven't. Maybe that hasn't been a moment where you put your faith and trust. I'd love to connect with you and talk with you. I'm sure you have, but I don't never want to assume. But if you trust in Jesus alone, you'll be saved. But here's the truth. And here's why this chapter, even though short, has such meaning. It's why it's that moment, pre-game intensity that I sense just leaping off the pages here. Is that the justice of God will hunt you down. Whether satisfied by the blood of Christ in your life, or will be satisfied on to your blood. Forever and ever, we can't escape the judgment of God. We cannot escape the wrath of God. It's going to happen. It's whether or not Christ takes the wrath on your behalf. And that's intense. But it's also glorious and good and magnificent and incredible. But here's the truth, and this is what's so encouraging, is Jesus does not fail. And this is what the rest of 16 through 22 is going to illuminate. Jesus does not fail. He crushes the head of the serpent. He propitiates, that word I used again, he propitiates the Father's wrath, drove Satan out and vanquished him forever, and secured our redemption. And for everyone who calls on the name of the Lord to be saved. And in light of just having Christmas not too long ago, I love how Wearsby, the scholar I was reading, one of them that puts it, it's the baby in the manger that is our hope. What a beautiful full circle picture, right? We read the book of Revelation, we read Matthew, and we see this beautiful picture. We see in Exodus this journey of the need of a Savior, and through the prophets and on through the Gospels, and we see that it's this humble manger scene that we hinge our hope on. And it's good. It's glorious. Again, Johnny, that's why I was excited about preaching, sharing, teaching this verse by verse commentary, because it's glorious scene of worship, but also the weight of God's wrath that is about to be poured out. But it also illuminates that Jesus is coming back.